Saren had spent 22 years learning how to be invisible. She was good at it, possibly the best. She could stand at the edge of a crowded room and not a single soul would register her presence. She could sit through an entire meal without reaching for the bread until everyone else had taken their share. She could smile through silence, swallow every sharp feeling, fold herself into the smallest possible version of a person, and hold that shape for hours without cracking. But she had never learned how to be invisible while sitting at the high table of the great hall of Ashenmere, with 200 wolves watching her, and the Alpha King 5 seats away, and the word useless still ringing off the blackened oak beams above her head. The winter summit had been tense from the start. Every seat at every long table was occupied. Torches burned along the walls, throwing restless shadows across the faces of warriors and elders and omegas who had gathered to hear the state of the pack. Grain stores were low. 2 border disputes had gone unresolved. The northern hunting grounds had been lost to the Harrowfang pack 3 weeks ago, and Ashenmere's warriors were stretched so thin that even the sentries at the gate looked exhausted. Saren sat in her usual place, last chair, end of the table, close enough to the royal seat to remind everyone. She was technically the queen, and far enough away that no one had to acknowledge it. She had been Valdrek Thane's mate for 3 months. Not by choice, not by courtship, not by any of the slow, aching, beautiful things the old stories described when they spoke of fated bonds. She had been chosen by the moonrite, the ancient ceremony that bound the strongest alpha to the wolf. The moon had chosen her. Valdrek had not. He sat at the head of the table now, broad-shouldered and unyielding, his jaw set in the permanent clench that Saren had come to understand was simply his face. He was listening to Elder Brennick, who was on his feet, and speaking to the hall with the measured cadence of a man who enjoyed hearing his own voice. "If I may address a matter of allocation, my king," Brennick said. Valdrek nodded once. "We have committed over 50 warriors to the eastern perimeter. 12 remain on the northern front. 6 guard the inner compound." Brennock paused, and Saren felt his attention shift toward her end of the table like the slow rotation of a siege weapon. "And we continue to sustain members of this pack who contribute nothing. Members who consume resources while producing no measurable value." Every muscle in Saren's body went rigid. She knew what this was. Brennock had been circling for weeks. Subtle comments about strength and purpose. Pointed questions about contributions to the pack that always seemed to land near her feet. He had opposed the moonrite match from the beginning, had argued publicly that a nameless orphan with no bloodline and no fighting ability had no place beside the Alpha King. And every day that Valdrek treated Saren like furniture seemed to prove the elder right. "I would ask the crown," Brennick continued, his gravelly voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "to consider whether every title bestowed upon members of this pack reflects genuine value to Ashenmere." He was looking directly at her now. So was everyone else. Serene's pulse hammered behind her ribs. She opened her mouth, though she had no plan for what she would say. Some defense, some justification. Something to prove that 3 months of trying to earn her place had not been entirely worthless. But Valdrek spoke first. "Brennock raises a fair point." The hall went still. Saren's hands went cold. "Every wolf in this pack must serve a purpose," Valdrek said, his voice low and flat and utterly devoid of warmth. He did not look at her. He looked at the room, at his pack, at everyone except the woman the moon had placed beside him. No exceptions. Wolves deemed useless to Ashenmere's survival will be reassigned to labor rotations, effective at first light. Useless. The word hit her like a fist to the sternum. Every wolf in that hall bore witness to the Alpha King, publicly, declaring his own mate unnecessary. Not one of them flinched. Not one of them looked away. They simply watched, the way a pack watches, when the weakest member is singled out, with the careful, measured attention of animals calculating whether intervention would cost more than it was worth. Saren sat perfectly still. She held her face in place through sheer force of will, the way she had held everything in place her entire life. Jaw steady, eyes forward, hands folded in her lap so no one could see them shaking. No exceptions, Valdric repeated. The summit continued, voices swelled around her, moving on to supply lines and patrol schedules, and things that mattered. Saren heard none of it. When the assembly was finally dismissed, she rose from her chair on legs that belonged to someone else, and walked out of the great hall. No one stopped her, no one spoke her name. She made it to the corridor behind the kitchens, before her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled, and she caught herself against the wall, one palm flat on the cold stone, the other pressed hard against her mouth to trap the sound that wanted to come out. It escaped anyway. A ragged, ugly sob, the kind she hadn't made since she was a girl sitting on the steps of a foundling house, watching the road for someone who was never coming back. She slid down the wall and sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, and let herself break. Just for a moment, just long enough to feel the full weight of it. Then she pressed both hands flat against her stomach. Beneath her palms, beneath skin and bone, and the thin fabric of a dress she had mended twice, because queens were not given a clothing allowance when the pack considered them decoration. Something stirred. Not movement, not yet. A second heartbeat. That was not her own. Small and steady and impossibly brave. 6 weeks. She had known for 6 weeks, and told no one, had carried the secret like a burning coal in her chest, waiting for the right moment. Waiting for Valdric to look at her, with something other than practiced indifference. Waiting for any sign that the man who had touched her with trembling hands on one single night, 3 months ago, still existed somewhere behind those cold gray eyes. That man was not coming back. Saren wiped her face, pressed her hands against the stone, and stood. Her legs still shook. But something beneath the grief had gone very quiet and very hard. Like iron cooling after the forge. She was carrying the Alpha King's heir. And tonight, before the moon set, she was going to vanish. The palace corridors were empty after midnight. Saren moved through them like smoke, barefoot on cold stone, carrying everything she owned in a canvas satchel that was not heavy enough. She had not owned much before becoming queen. She owned even less now. A change of clothes. A bundle of dried herbs she had taken from the kitchen stores, which was theft, technically. But she decided the queen was allowed to steal rosemary. A small knife with a bone handle that had belonged to the foundling house matron. And a leather cord with a single river stone pendant that was the only thing her parents had left with her when they'd placed her on those steps 22 years ago. She stopped at the door of the chamber she had slept in for 3 months. Not their chamber, hers. Valdric had given her rooms of her own on the second night after the moonrite. A polite and devastating way of telling her that whatever the ceremony demanded, he would not be sharing a bed with a stranger. She stepped inside and did not light a candle. Moonlight fell through the narrow window in a pale silver line, cutting across the bed she had made every morning with military precision, even though no one ever came to check. She pulled the last of her things from the small wooden chest by the wall. A comb, a pair of woolen stockings, a folded square of cloth she had been saving for something she could not remember what. Her hands paused over the only item she had not packed. A pressed wildflower, small and white, flattened between the pages of a borrowed book. She had picked it the morning after. The memory arrived without permission, 3 months ago. The night of the moon-rite bonding. Valdric had come to her room because tradition required it, and he had stood in the doorway, looking like a man being asked to swallow poison. She had expected coldness. She had expected efficiency. What she had not expected was the way his hands had trembled when he touched her face. It had started distant, dutiful. 2 strangers bound by a ceremony neither had chosen, but then something had shifted. She did not know whether it was the bond pulling at both of them, or whether the man behind the mask had simply surfaced for a breath of air, but his hands had softened. His touch had carried a tenderness that contradicted every rigid, guarded thing she had observed about him. He had whispered something in the dark. She thought it was her name. She was never sure. Afterward, he had stayed. That was the part that had undone her. He could have left. She had expected him to leave. But he had turned onto his side and looked at her in the dark, and for a few fragile minutes, they had simply been two people lying next to each other in the quiet. She had told him about the Riverstone pendant and how it was all her parents had left her. He had said nothing, but his thumb had traced a slow circle on her shoulder. By morning he was gone. The bed beside her was cold. And when she saw him at breakfast, he looked through her, the way a window looks through glass, like she was not there, like the night had not happened. Like the man who had touched her with careful, shaking hands, had been a dream she had invented to comfort herself. It never happened again. Seren stared at the pressed flower in the moonlight. Then she placed it back inside the book and left it on the nightstand. She would not bring ghosts with her where she was going. The corridor outside was silent. She moved quickly, keeping to the servants' passages she had memorized during 3 months of wandering a palace that did not want her past the kitchens, where the banked fires still gave off faint heat. Past the armory, where the clang of steel had startled her every morning for the first week, until she learned to expect it. Past the council chamber where she had once sat quietly in a corner during a strategy meeting, hoping to be useful, hoping someone might ask her opinion about the medicinal herbs the scouts had reported growing near the northern border. No one had asked. Brannick had looked at her with visible contempt. Valdric had looked at the wall. She reached the rear gate. A single guard stood at the post, a young wolf named Haddon, whom she recognized because he was the only person in the entire compound who had ever said good morning to her without being prompted. Seren's heart climbed into her throat. She could not fight him. She could not outrun him. She was an Omega with no combat training and a 6-week pregnancy and a canvas satchel full of stolen rosemary. But Haddon was leaning against the gatepost with his chin on his chest and his eyes closed. He had drawn the midnight watch again. 3rd time this week, if she had counted correctly, and she had, because counting things no one else bothered to track was one of the useless skills she had perfected. She moved past him in silence, easing the iron latch with both hands to keep it from clinking. The gate swung open on hinges she had oiled 2 weeks ago because the sound had been bothering her and no one else had fixed it. The irony tasted bitter enough to choke on. The night air hit her face, and she almost stopped. Beyond the gate lay the forest that bordered Ashenmere territory. Beyond the forest lay the open country, and beyond that, the kind of emptiness that swallowed people who had no name, no money, no pack, and no plan. She was all 4 of those things. You are being stupid, she told herself. You are going to die out there. But she was going to die in here too, just slower, just quieter. One small humiliation at a time until there was nothing left of her at all. Seren stepped through the gate and pulled it shut behind her. She did not look back at the palace. She did not look up at the window of the room where Valdric slept alone, where he had always slept alone, where he would continue sleeping alone and never know that his child had passed within 10 feet of him on its way out of his life. The forest closed around her. The dark pressed in. Above the treetops the moon hung fat and silver and indifferent, the same moon that had bound her to a man who did not want her. She walked until the trees swallowed the last outline of Ashenmere's walls. She walked until her feet bled, and her legs burned, and the satchel strap had worn a raw line into her shoulder. She walked until the sky began to lighten in the east, and the birds started calling to each other from the canopy in sharp, questioning notes. Then she stopped in a clearing, sank to her knees, pressed her hands against her stomach, and made the only promise she had ever been sure of. I will not let anyone call you useless, she whispered. Not ever, not once. The forest was still. The dawn crept forward, and somewhere behind her, far away and growing farther by the hour, the Alpha King slept through the disappearance of everything he did not know he had. She walked for 4 days. The first 2 were the worst. She had no trail, no map, no sense of direction beyond a vague instinct to move south, away from Ashenmere territory, away from the hunting routes she had overheard, the warriors discussing during meals she was not supposed to be listening to. Her shoes wore through on the second morning. She wrapped her feet in strips torn from the hem of her dress and kept moving. She ate, sparingly. The herbs she had taken were not food, but she found wild onion growing at the edge of a stream on the first evening and dug up enough to keep her stomach from folding in on itself. She drank from the stream and tried not to think about the fact that she was a pregnant woman alone in unclaimed territory where rogues and predators both hunted freely. On the third day, she found a road. Narrow, rutted, more mud than stone, but a road all the same. She followed it south, and by late afternoon, she passed a farmer driving a cart full of root vegetables. He looked at her bare feet and torn dress and offered her a ride without asking any questions. Siren sat beside him on the bench and pressed her back against the wooden slats and tried to remember the last time someone had offered her something without her having to earn it first. "Where are you headed?" the farmer asked. "Wherever this road goes," Siren replied. He gave her a long sideways look but said nothing more. By evening, the road opened into a shallow valley, and at the bottom of it, tucked against the curve of a river, sat a village so small it barely qualified as one, a cluster of stone cottages with thatched roofs. A market square that was really just a patch of packed dirt, with a well in the center, a smithy, a grain store, and what appeared to be a trading post with a crooked chimney. "Fen Hollow," the farmer said. "Not much, but it's honest." "It's perfect," Siren whispered, and she meant it with every broken, exhausted, terrified fiber of her being. She climbed down from the cart and stood in the failing light, her satchel hanging from one shoulder, her feet wrapped in rags, her hair tangled and unwashed, and she thought she had never been so relieved to be anywhere in her entire life. The trading post was still open. A broad-shouldered woman with silver-streaked hair and hands like leather stood behind the counter, sorting jars of something dark and viscous. She looked up when Siren entered and her eyes moved from the torn dress to the wrapped feet to the satchel to Siren's face in a single efficient sweep. "You look like you've been dragged behind a horse," the woman said. "I feel like it too," Siren admitted. "Running from something?" Siren hesitated. The truth was too large and too dangerous and too humiliating to hand to a stranger, but the lie she constructed was close enough. "My situation became untenable," Siren said carefully. "I left." The woman studied her for a long moment, then extended a hand. "Marin Dunwell. I run this trading post and I'm the closest thing Fenhollow has to a healer, which mostly means I'm the one who gets woken up at midnight when someone's cow is birthing sideways." Siren shook her hand. "Siren, just Siren. Just Siren." Marin's gaze dropped to Siren's midsection for exactly 1 second. Siren went very still. "How far along?" Marin asked, her voice dropping. The denial rose automatically. "No, I am not. You are mistaken." But it died in Siren's throat, because she was so tired of pretending, so bone-deep, weary of holding shapes that did not fit, that the truth fell out of her before she could catch it. 6 weeks, she said, almost 7. Marin nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already decided. "Can you work?" Siren blinked at her. "Yes." "Can you sort herbs?" "Yes. I know most medicinal plants by sight and scent." "Do you know the difference between feverwort and false feverwort?" "Feverwort has a squared stem, and the leaves grow in pairs. False feverwort has a rounded stem, and the leaves alternate. If you crush a feverwort leaf between your fingers, it smells faintly of black pepper. False feverwort smells like cut grass." Siren paused. "Also, false feverwort will stop a headache, but feverwort will stop a heart, so it matters." Marin stared at her for a long beat. Then something shifted in her face, a softening around the mouth that was not quite a smile, but was close. "There's a room above the shop," Marin said. "It's small, the roof leaks when the wind blows from the west, and the bed is harder than a grudge, but it's warm, and it's yours if you want it." Siren's vision blurred. She blinked hard and fast, and forced the tears back, because she was not going to cry in front of this woman she had known for 90 seconds. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me yet," Marin said. "I open at dawn and I don't tolerate laziness." The word landed differently here. Not like a blade, like a challenge, like something Saren could meet, head on, and defeat. You will not find me lazy, Saren said quietly. And she meant that too. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm that Saren found almost peaceful. She rose before dawn and sorted Marin's stores, reorganizing shelves that had not been properly arranged in what appeared to be years. She learned the names and faces of the villagers who came through the trading post. She treated a child's infected scrape with a poultice that Marin watched her prepare with sharp, evaluating eyes and then grudging approval. She was useful here. The word had been poison in Ashenmere. Here it was oxygen. Weeks turned. Her body changed slowly. The slight thickening at her waist that she hid beneath loose tunics. The nausea that hit every morning like clockwork and retreated by midday. Marin said nothing about it. But a cup of ginger tea began appearing beside Saren's bed each morning before she woke, and Saren understood that she had been silently, efficiently, claimed by a woman who showed care through action, and never through words. She thought about Valdric less often. That was a lie. She thought about him constantly. But the thoughts changed shape. At first they had been sharp and hot, replaying the summit, replaying the word, replaying the faces of every wolf who had watched her be discarded. Then they cooled into something duller, sadder, a persistent ache behind her ribs that she recognized as the bond pulling taut across the distance between them. She ignored it. She had practice, ignoring pain. On a market day 7 weeks after her arrival in Fenhollow, a trader passed through from the north. He was loud and sunburned and eager to share news with anyone who would buy him a drink. Saren was stacking jars behind the counter when she heard him speaking to Marin at the front of the shop. "The whole territory is in chaos," he said, leaning against the counter like a man settling in for a performance. "The Alpha King of Ashenmere has lost his mind, completely unhinged." Saren's hands froze around the jar she was holding. "What do you mean, lost his mind?" Marin asked, her tone carefully neutral. "His queen vanished. One morning, she was there. Next morning, nothing. No trail, no scent, no note." The trader lowered his voice to the theatrical pitch of a man who loved gossip more than accuracy. "They say he tore apart every room in the palace, with his bare hands looking for her. They say he ran patrols himself for 3 straight days without sleeping. They say he turned on his own beta when the man suggested she might have left willingly." The jar in Saren's hands slipped. She caught it before it hit the floor, but her heart was slamming so hard against her ribs that she could hear it in her ears. "And now," the trader continued, clearly delighted by his own story, "he has sent search parties in every direction. Scouts, trackers, his best wolves, and the word is that the king himself is leading the southern sweep." He paused for emphasis. "Personally," Saren set the jar down on the shelf, very carefully. Her hands were shaking. "The southern sweep, Fenhollow was south." Marin's voice came from the front of the shop, steady and unreadable. "And how far south have these search parties reached?" The trader shrugged. "Last I heard, they had crossed the river at Dunmore Bridge. That is maybe 3 days' ride from here, maybe less, if they are moving fast." The room tilted. Saren pressed her palms flat against the shelf and forced herself to breathe. 3 days. Valdric was 3 days away, and he was coming south, and he was looking for her, and he had no idea what he would find. Saren did not sleep that night. She lay on the narrow bed above the trading post, staring at the ceiling, where a water stain had spread into a shape that looked like a hand reaching for something it could not quite grasp. The trader's words played on a loop behind her eyes. 3 days, the southern sweep. Personally. She pressed her palms against her stomach, where the barely there swell of new life had just begun to push against the waistband of her borrowed trousers. "We could run again," she whispered to the dark. "We could leave before dawn. Head east toward the coast. Find a fishing village where no one has ever heard of Ashenmere or the Alpha King or the Moonright." But her feet were only just healed. Her body was only just beginning to recover from weeks of walking on scraps and wild onion and determination. And somewhere in the last 7 weeks, Fenhollow had done something dangerous to her. It had started to feel like home. She was still staring at the ceiling when footsteps sounded on the stairs. The door opened without a knock, because Marin did not believe in knocking in her own building. "You heard the traitor," Marin said. It was not a question. "Yes." Marin crossed the small room and sat on the end of the bed with the easy authority of a woman who had never in her life asked permission to sit down. "Are you going to tell me who you are running from, or do I have to guess?" Saren closed her eyes. The secret pressed against the inside of her chest like a fist. She had held it for so long that releasing it felt physically dangerous, like pulling a stone from the base of a wall and watching to see if the whole thing came down. "I am the Alpha Queen of Ashenmere," Saren said. The words tasted strange in her mouth, like a title that belonged to someone else. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Saren counted. "Well," Marin said finally, "that explains the herb knowledge." Saren opened her eyes, startled. Of everything she had expected, dry humor was not on the list. "That is your reaction?" Saren asked. "What would you prefer? Curtsying? Fainting?" Marin crossed her arms. "You are a pregnant woman, sleeping above my shop, with nothing to her name but a satchel of stolen rosemary. The crown does not change the situation." Saren felt the absurd, terrible urge to laugh. It came out as something closer to a sob. "He does not know about the baby," Saren said, her voice cracking. "He called me useless in front of the entire pack, in front of 200 people. He looked right through me and told them all that every wolf must serve a purpose. And he meant me, Marin. Everyone in that room knew he meant me." Marin was quiet for a moment. "And did you tell him? Before you left, did you tell him about the child?" "No." "Why not?" The question cut deeper than it should have. Saren stared at the water stain on the ceiling and tried to find the honest answer beneath the layers of hurt and pride and self-preservation. "Because I was afraid he would take the baby and still not want me," she said. "Because I could survive being called useless. But I could not survive watching my child grow up in a home where its mother was invisible." Marin said nothing for a long time. Then she placed one rough hand on Saren's ankle, a brief, firm pressure that said more than words. "You are staying," Marin said. "If the search parties come through Fenhollow, you are a widow from the Eastern Valleys. Your name is Wren. Your mate died of fever 6 months ago. I will handle the rest." "Marin, I cannot ask you to lie for me." "You did not ask. I volunteered." Marin stood and moved toward the door. "Get some sleep. You are useless to me if you are exhausted." The word landed soft, this time, almost fond. Saren smiled into the dark after Marin left, and felt the first fragile thread of hope she had allowed herself in months. 3 days passed. Saren worked. She sorted and labeled and reorganized and treated a farmer's infected tooth with a clove oil preparation that made him weep with gratitude. She kept her head down. She answered to Wren without hesitation, because she had spent a lifetime answering to names that were not hers. On the 4th day, wolves came through Fenhollow. 2 of them. Ashenmere scouts in traveling leathers, their faces wine-burned and tired. Saren saw them from the upstairs window and every nerve in her body went cold. She recognized one of them, Jorath, a senior tracker, one of Valdrick's best. She had served him tea once during a council meeting, and he had not looked at her. "Stay upstairs," Marin said, from the bottom of the stairs. "Do not come down for any reason." Saren sat on the bed with her hands pressed flat against her stomach and listened to the muffled conversation below. She could hear Marin's voice, steady and unhurried. She could hear Jorath asking questions. "Have you seen a woman traveling alone? Young, slight, build, brown hair? No distinguishing marks? No distinguishing marks." That was how the Alpha King's own scouts described his queen. Saren pressed her fist against her mouth and breathed through the pain of it. Marin's voice carried clearly through the floorboards. "We get drifters through here. Now and again." A widow passed through about a month back, heading east toward the coast. Thin woman. Looked half-starved. "Could be who you are looking for." A pause. Boots on wooden planks. The door opening and closing. Saren did not move until Marin appeared at the top of the stairs. They have gone, Marin said, heading east. Saren exhaled so hard her vision flickered at the edges. Thank you. Marin leaned against the doorframe. That tracker asked about you. By description, not by name. Either the king does not want people knowing his queen has fled, or he does not think of you as a queen at all. She paused. I suspect it is the former. Because a man who did not care would not send his best wolves to the edge of the known world, looking for a woman he called useless. The words settled in Saren's chest like stones dropped into still water. She felt the ripples spread and did not know what to do with them. It does not matter, Saren said. Whether he cares or not, I cannot go back. Marin gave her a look that suggested she had opinions about that statement, but was choosing to keep them. Rest, she said. You are growing a person. It takes energy. Saren lay back on the bed and placed both hands on her stomach, and for the first time since leaving Ashenmere, she let herself imagine a future. Not the one the Moonlight had promised her. Not the one she had dreamed of during those 3 humiliating months of trying to earn a place beside a man made of stone, but a smaller future, a quieter one. A room above a trading post. A child who would know what it felt like to be wanted. A life built on competence and kindness and the stubborn refusal to disappear. It was not the life she had imagined, but it was hers. And then the baby kicked for the first time. And every thought in Saren's head went perfectly, brilliantly silent. 5 months later, on the coldest night Fenhollow had seen in a generation, Saren's daughter was born. It happened fast and slow at the same time, the way all impossible things do. The pain started at midday, subtle enough that Saren tried to work through them, sorting a new shipment of dried elderflower with gritted teeth, and a stubborn refusal to admit what was happening. You are in labor, Marin said flatly, appearing beside her like a woman who had been waiting for this moment, with the patience of a siege commander. I am sorting elderflower, Saren replied through clenched teeth. You are sorting elderflower while in labor. Marin took the jar from her hands. Upstairs, now. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and breathing, and Marin's hands, steady and sure, guiding her through the worst of it, with the calm efficiency of someone who had delivered more lambs and calves and human children than she cared to count. Push, Marin said. I am pushing, Saren gasped. Push harder. I am going to push you out the window. There is the spirit, Marin said, and something in her voice was almost warm. The pain crested, broke. And then there was sound. A cry, sharp and furious and startlingly loud for something so small. Marin caught the baby and held her up, and Saren saw her daughter for the first time, through a haze of tears and exhaustion and joy, so fierce it felt like it might crack her open from the inside. She was tiny, red-faced and angry and perfect. A shock of dark hair, darker than Saren's, the exact shade of midnight that Saren had only ever seen on one other person. And when the baby opened her eyes, still unfocused and searching, they were gray. Valdrick's gray. The recognition hit Saren like a physical blow. She reached for her daughter with shaking hands, and Marin placed the baby against her chest. And the moment that small, warm weight settled against her skin, something inside Saren rearranged itself permanently. Hello, Saren whispered. Hello, you are so angry. You got that from your father. The baby's fist closed around Saren's finger with surprising strength. The crying stopped. Those storm-colored irises blinked up at her, still unfocused but searching, and Saren felt the bond form. Not the Moonlight bond, not the pulling, aching tether that still connected her to a man 40 miles north. Something different. Something fiercer, the absolute, non-negotiable devotion of a mother to the life she had carried and protected and chosen above everything else. What will you call her? Marin asked, washing her hands in the basin by the window. Saren looked down at her daughter's face, at the dark hair, and the gray eyes, and the furious, determined expression that had not yet softened. Reverie? Saren said. Reverie, Marin repeated, testing the name. A dream. The best dream I have ever had. Saren murmured against her daughter's forehead. The first weeks were hard. Reverie did not sleep in anything resembling a pattern. She was demanding and loud, and possessed a set of lungs that seemed physically impossible for a creature her size. Siren walked the floorboards at 3 in the morning, bouncing, swaying, singing half-remembered lullabies in a voice cracked with exhaustion, and loving every miserable, sleepless second of it, because Reverie needed her. Needed her specifically, not because of a ceremony or a title or a bond imposed by moonlight, but because Siren was her mother, and mothers were not useless. Marin helped, without being asked, and without making a production of it. A bowl of soup would appear beside Saren's bed. The shop would be opened and stocked before Saren came downstairs. A knitted blanket, soft and thick, and clearly made by hands more accustomed to rough work, materialized in Reverie's cradle one morning with no explanation. "You made this," Saren said, holding up the blanket. "It was in the storeroom," Marin said without looking up from her ledger. "It smells like the wool you were carding last week. Many things are made of wool." Siren smiled and did not press it, because she had learned that Marin expressed love the way some people expressed weather. It simply happened around her, without announcement or apology. Spring arrived. Reverie grew. She learned to smile, and when she did, Siren's heart performed acrobatics that should have been medically concerning. She learned to laugh, a bubbling, hiccuping sound that made Marin pause mid-sentence and stare at the baby with an expression of such unguarded tenderness that Saren pretended not to notice, and through it all, the bond pulled. Saren felt it constantly, a low, persistent ache in her chest, like a rope tied to her ribs and stretched taut across the miles. Some nights, it tightened until she could barely breathe. Some mornings, she woke with tears on her face, and the phantom warmth of someone's hand on her shoulder. She told herself it was fading. It was not fading. News from the north came in fragments, carried by traders and travelers who passed through Fen Hollow with increasing frequency. The Alpha King of Ashenmere had recalled his search parties. That was the first piece, and it arrived on a spring morning that smelled like rain and new grass, and Saren did not know whether she felt relieved or devastated. The second piece arrived a week later. The king had not recalled the search parties because he had given up. He had recalled them because he was now searching alone, on foot, in wolf form, running the borders himself, night after night, covering ground that would have killed a lesser wolf. "He has gone feral," the trader said, and the word landed in Siren's chest like a stone. "They say his beta can barely control him. They say the pack is fracturing. 3 families have already petitioned to leave Ashenmere. The elders want him to take a new mate, someone with bloodlines, someone who can stabilize the pack. He refuses." Saren stood behind the counter, with her hands flat on the wood and her pulse roaring in her ears. "They say he will not eat, will not sleep in the palace, will not hold court. He runs the perimeter every night and comes back at dawn, torn out from the thorns and half collapsed from exhaustion." The trader shook his head. "The man is destroying himself." That night, after the shop was closed and Reverie was asleep in her cradle, Saren sat at the small table by the window and stared at the moon. The bond ached so fiercely, she had to press her fist against her sternum to keep from crying out. He was in pain. She could feel it, distant and muffled but undeniable. Not anger, not pride, something raw, something that felt like grief. "He misses you," Marin said from the doorway. "He misses the idea of me," Saren corrected. "He never wanted the reality. People do not run themselves into the ground over ideas, child." Saren looked at her daughter sleeping in the cradle, at the dark hair and the fierce little face and the small fists curled against the blanket Marin had pretended not to make. Then she looked at the moon. "It does not matter," she said, but her voice broke on the last word, and they both heard it. In the cradle, Reverie stirred, opened her eyes, and looked directly at her mother with an expression that was so startlingly like her father's that Saren had to leave the room. He came on a Tuesday. Saren would remember that detail for the rest of her life. It was a Tuesday market day in Fenhollow, and the square was busier than usual. She was behind the counter, weighing dried chamomile for old Tilda Voss, who came in every week for the same order, and every week asked the same questions about whether chamomile truly helped with sleep, or whether that was just something healers said to justify the price. It truly helps, Saren said. The same answer she gave every week, and Tilda made the same skeptical sound she made every week. And the routine of it was so ordinary and so safe that Saren had let her guard down for the first time in months. She did not hear the door open. She did not see him enter. What she felt was the bond. It hit her like a wall of fire. The low, persistent ache that had lived in her chest for months suddenly ignited, blazing through her ribs and up her spine, and into the base of her skull with an intensity that whited out her vision. Her hands released the chamomile. The measuring scale clattered against the counter. Old Tilda said something, but the words arrived underwater, distant and warped. Saren looked up. Valdric Thane stood in the doorway of Marin's trading post. He was thinner than she remembered. The broad shoulders were still there, still imposing, still filling the frame of the door in a way that made the room feel suddenly too small. But the flesh had been carved from his face. His cheekbones stood out like blades beneath skin that was too pale. The circles beneath his eyes were so deep, they looked painted on, bruised purple and black. And his gray eyes, the same gray eyes that stared back at her from her daughter's face every single day, were wild, not wild with anger. Wild with something worse. He looked like a man who had been dying slowly and had just been told he might live. Neither of them spoke. The silence in the trading post was absolute. Tilda Voss looked between them with the sharp, delighted attention of a woman who had just realized she was witnessing something far more interesting than chamomile. Saren, Valdric said, her name in his mouth. After all these months, after everything, it should not have affected her. She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed cold indifference, had practiced speeches full of justified anger, had imagined herself standing tall and untouchable and delivering the kind of devastating calm that would make him understand exactly what he had lost. Instead, her eyes filled with tears, and her hands started shaking, and she hated herself for it. She hated that her body still responded to him. She hated that the bond sang in her chest like a hymn. She hated that he was standing there, looking like a man who had walked through fire to reach her, and she could not stop herself from caring. "You should not be here," she said. Her voice did not shake. That was the only victory she managed. "I have been everywhere else," he replied. "Every road, every village, every border town between here and the northern mountains. 8 months. His voice cracked on the number. 8 months of searching. You recalled the search parties. I recalled them because they were looking for a woman who did not want to be found, and I decided that if anyone was going to find her, it would be me or no one." He took a step forward and stopped, like he had hit an invisible wall. "I did not trust anyone else with this." "With what?" Saren asked, her chin lifting. "Finding your useless queen?" The word landed exactly where she aimed it. Valdric flinched. It was small, a tightening around his eyes, a fractional shift in his jaw, but Saren saw it and felt a sharp, ugly satisfaction that immediately turned to ash in her mouth. "That is not," he began. "That is exactly what you said." Saren's voice was steady now, because anger was a better foundation than grief. "In front of 200 wolves, you said no exceptions. You looked at me like I was a line item on a ledger that did not balance. And every wolf in that room understood what you meant. I know what I said. Then why are you here?" He opened his mouth, closed it. His hands hung at his sides and she could see them trembling. The same trembling she remembered from one single night 3 months into a marriage that had never really started. The only night he had been human with her. "Because I was wrong," he said. The words fell into the space between them like stones into deep water. Saren watched the ripples and felt nothing she could name. "I was wrong," Valdric repeated, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "About everything. About you, about what I said, about every morning I walked past you like you were not there. About every meal where I let Brennec's poison go unchallenged. About the moonlight night when I held you and then spent 3 months pretending I had not. Saren's breath caught. I did not know how to want you, he said, and the confession sounded like it was being torn from him. The moon chose you, and I resented it. I resented being told who to love. I resented being bound to someone I had not chosen, and I punished you for it, and you did nothing to deserve any of it. Tilda Voss made a small sound. They had both forgotten she was there. Tilda, Saren said, without looking away from Valdric. Your chamomile is on the counter. I am not leaving, Tilda whispered urgently. Tilda. The old woman collected her chamomile with agonizing slowness, her eyes darting between them like a woman witnessing the most gripping scene of her life, and shuffled toward the door. She paused at the threshold and looked back. Then Marin appeared in the doorway behind Tilda, took one look at Valdric, one look at Saren, and physically steered the old woman out of the shop. The door closed. They were alone. You found me, Saren said. You have said your piece. Now leave. Something broke behind his eyes. She saw it happen in real time, the collapse of whatever scaffolding had been holding him together for the last 8 months. I cannot, he said. You will, Saren. He took another step forward. I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know what I did. I know what it cost you. But I need you to understand that I have not slept in 8 months. I have not eaten a full meal. I have not shifted without running until my legs gave out, because the wolf cannot stop searching for you. The pack is falling apart, and I cannot hold it together because I cannot hold myself together. That is not my problem, Saren said, even though every word felt like swallowing glass. No, he agreed. It is not. It is mine. I built it, every brick of it. He swallowed hard. But I am asking you, please let me try. Let me earn back what I destroyed, not because you owe me anything, but because losing you was the thing that finally made me understand what I had. Saren stared at him. The anger was still there, banked, but burning. The hurt was still there, a year's worth of it, compacted and dense, but beneath both, stubborn and impossible and completely unwelcome, the bond hummed. She opened her mouth to tell him no, to tell him it was too late. To tell him that she had built a life here that did not include him, and she was not willing to tear it down for a man who had taken 8 months to say what should have been said on the first morning. Then from the back room, clear and bright, and utterly unmistakable, came the sound of a baby crying. Valdric froze. The color left his face so completely that for a moment, Saren thought he might collapse. His head turned toward the sound with the slow, stunned precision of a man hearing something his brain could not process. Saren watched him put it together. She watched the timeline assemble behind his eyes. She watched him count backward from this moment to the moonlight night, the only night, and arrive at a number that changed everything. Siren? He whispered. And her name sounded different now, fractured, terrified. Her name is Reverie, Saren said, and her voice did not waver. She has your eyes, she has your temper, and she has never once in her life been called useless. The sound that came from him was not a word. It was not a growl. It was the sound of a man whose entire understanding of what he had lost had just doubled in an instant and tripled in the next. He took a step toward the back room. Stop, Saren said, and he stopped. Immediately. Completely. Like the word had turned his legs to stone. You do not walk into that room until you understand something, Saren said, her voice low and fierce and shaking with everything she had held inside for 8 months. She is mine. I carried her alone. I birthed her alone. I have fed her and rocked her and walked the floor with her at 3 in the morning, alone. And if you walk through that door and look at her, you do not get to leave. You do not get to decide she is inconvenient. You do not get to be her father on the days it suits you, and a stranger on the days it does not. You are in or you are out, Valdric, and I need you to choose right now. Tears ran down his face. The Alpha King of Ashenmere. the wolf who had ended a border war, the man who had not cried once in 28 years of living, stood in a trading post in a village that barely had a name, and wept. "In," he said, "I am in. For her, and for you, for as long as you will let me." Saren held his gaze for a long, measured moment. Then she turned and walked toward the back room, and she did not tell him to follow. He followed anyway. Reverie was awake. She lay in her cradle with both fists raised above her head like a tiny warrior preparing for battle, her pale gaze fixed on the ceiling with the intense concentration of someone who had recently discovered that ceilings existed and found them deeply suspicious. Saren stopped in the doorway. Valdric stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, and she heard the exact moment he saw his daughter for the first time. He stopped breathing. Not a gasp, not a sharp intake. He simply stopped, the way a heart stops, between beats, and the silence behind her was so total that Saren almost turned around to make sure he was still standing. Then he made a sound, low, broken, involuntary. The sound of a man being split open by something so enormous, it could not fit inside his body. "She is," he started. "Loud," Saren finished. "Stubborn, angry about most things, easily offended by being put down when she wants to be held. Possessive of her blanket." She paused. "She is wonderful." Valdric moved past her slowly, each step careful and deliberate, the way the scouts at Ashenmere approached wounded animals. He stopped beside the cradle and looked down at his daughter. Reverie looked back. For a long moment, father and daughter regarded each other with identical gray eyes and identical expressions of wary assessment. Then Reverie's face crumpled and she began to scream. "She does that," Saren said. "What do I do?" Valdric asked, and the raw panic in his voice was so genuine, so utterly stripped of the controlled authority she had come to associate with him, that something cracked in Saren's chest. "Pick her up." He reached into the cradle with hands that were shaking badly enough that Saren almost intervened. But his fingers found the baby with a gentleness that stole the breath from her lungs. He lifted Reverie against his chest, one broad hand spanning the entire width of her back, and held her the way a man holds something he knows he does not deserve. Reverie screamed louder. "She is not happy," Valdric said, his eyes wide. "She does not know you yet." The words landed harder than Saren intended. She watched them register on his face, watched the flinch that followed, and felt the familiar war between compassion and fury that had been tearing her apart since the moment he walked through the door. Reverie's screaming intensified to a pitch that made the glass jars on the shelf rattle. Valdric held her awkwardly, his massive frame hunched around her tiny body, his expression caught between devotion and absolute terror. "Talk to her," Saren said. "And say what? Anything. She does not care what you say. She cares how you sound." Valdric looked down at his screaming daughter. His jaw worked. Then he spoke, and his voice was lower and softer than Saren had ever heard it. "I am sorry I was not here," he said to Reverie. "I should have been here. I should have been here for every single moment. And I was not. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." Reverie stopped crying. Not gradually, not a slow trailing off. She stopped, mid-scream, and blinked up at him, with her mouth still open. Then, her fist found his collar and closed around it, and she pulled herself against his chest with the determined, possessive grip of someone who had decided this particular surface belonged to her now. Valdric's entire body went still. He looked at Saren over their daughter's head, and the expression on his face was so raw, so devastated and grateful and broken all at once, that Saren had to look away. "She has your grip," Valdric murmured. "I am not stubborn. You searched for 8 months on foot. That is not stubbornness, that is." He trailed off. Reverie had pressed her face against his chest, and her breathing was changing, slowing, the way it did when she was settling toward sleep. Valdric looked down at her with the stunned, helpless expression of a man who had just been conquered by something that weighed less than a bag of flour. The room was quiet for a long time after that. Maren appeared in the doorway eventually. She looked at the Alpha King of Ashenmere, standing in her back room, holding a sleeping baby against his chest, with both arms wrapped around her like he was shielding her from the world. And she made an expression that Saren had never seen on her face before. It looked almost like approval. "I have closed the shop," Marin said. "You two need to talk." She left without waiting for a response. Because Marin did not wait for responses, Saren sat on the edge of the bed. Valdric lowered himself into the chair by the window, still holding Reverie, still handling her with the terrified reverence of someone holding a live explosive. "Talk," Saren said. Valdric was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on his daughter's sleeping face. When he spoke, his voice was measured, each word placed with care. "After you left," he began, then stopped. "After I drove you away." He corrected himself, and the correction mattered. The palace felt wrong. Not empty, wrong. Like the walls had shifted, and the corridors led to different places. I told myself it was the bond. That it was only the bond that I was reacting to, a severed connection, not to losing a person. He paused. That lasted about 3 days. On the 4th day, I found the book. Saren went cold. "You left a pressed flower in it," Valdric said quietly. "White, small, flattened between the pages. I recognized it. There were wildflowers, growing in the courtyard, the morning after the moonrise." He swallowed. "It did not mean anything," Saren said, "even though it had meant everything." "It meant you remembered that night the same way I did," Valdric replied. "It meant you kept something from it. And I had spent 3 months pretending it never happened, pretending I did not lie awake every night in my empty room, thinking about the way you told me about the Riverstone pendant, your parents left you, and the way your voice sounded in the dark." Saren's throat tightened. "You never showed it." "Not once." "I know." "Why?" The question was simple and enormous, and it filled the entire room. Valdric looked at the window. The late afternoon light caught the hollows in his face, the evidence of 8 months of self-destruction. "Because the moonrise took my choice away," he said, "and I could not forgive it. Every alpha before me chose his mate, courted her, won her. The bond was the reward, not the starting point. But the moon chose you for me before I could even learn your name. And I was so angry about what had been taken from me that I never considered what had been given." He looked at her. "You were given to me, and I treated you like an obligation, like a debt I owed the ceremony. And every day that I ignored you, every time I let Brannock speak about you like you were less than, every morning I walked past you without meeting your eyes, I was proving to myself that the moon had been wrong, that I could resist this. That no one, not even fate, could tell me who to love." His voice dropped. "But the moon was not wrong, Saren. It was the only thing that was right, and I was too proud and too frightened to see it." The silence that followed was heavy enough to press Saren into the bed. She felt the bond in her chest, warm and aching and straining toward him. And she fought it, because giving in felt like losing. "You called me useless," she said, and the words came out quiet and sharp and final. "In front of everyone, I had tried so hard to earn the respect of. You handed Brannock the weapon he needed to destroy me, and you did not even look at me when you did it." Valdric flinched like she had struck him. "I did not mean you," he said. "Everyone in that room thought you did. I know." His voice was barely audible. "I was answering Brannock's challenge to my authority. He was questioning my leadership, suggesting I was weak, suggesting I could not make hard decisions, and I reacted by proving him right. I said the most brutal thing I could think of to show the pack. I was still in control, and I used you to do it." "You sacrificed me," Saren said. Yes, the word hung in the air between them. No defense, no justification. Just the truth, ugly and simple and undeniable. "I sacrificed you to protect my pride," Valdric said. "And the moment you left that hall, I knew what I had done. I knew it before you reached the corridor. I felt it through the bond. This collapse. Like a building falling. And I sat there in my chair and did nothing because I told myself you would be there in the morning. That I would fix it in the morning." His hands tightened around Reverie, who slept on, oblivious to the wreckage around her. But you were not there in the morning, he whispered, and the building kept falling, and it has not stopped falling since. Saren closed her eyes. The tears came, and she let them, because she had been holding them for 8 months, and she was tired of holding things. I do not know how to trust you, she said. I know. I do not know if I can. I know that too. And I will not bring Reverie into a home where she could be treated the way I was treated. I will not raise her in a pack that sees her mother as disposable. That is not negotiable, Valdric. That is the wall you cannot climb. Then I will tear the wall down, he said, and his voice was steady for the first time since he had entered the shop. Not the one between us, the one around Ashenmere Brennock, the elders who stood by the culture that let it happen. I will dismantle every part of it that made you feel invisible, and I will do it whether you come back or not, because it needs to be done. Because I should have done it the moment the moon chose you, and I stood in front of my pack and let them doubt you. Reverie stirred in his arms. Her gray eyes opened, found Saren, and she reached for her mother with both hands. Saren crossed the room and took her daughter. Their fingers brushed during the transfer, and the contact sent a shock through the bond that made them both go still. Stay in Fenhollow tonight, Saren said. We will talk more tomorrow. Saren, tomorrow, Valdric. He stood slowly, and she could see what it cost him to step back, to put distance between himself and the two people. The bond was screaming at him to hold on to. There is an inn at the end of the lane, she said. Marin knows the innkeeper. He nodded. He looked at Reverie one more time, and his face did something complicated and devastating that Saren filed away in the part of her heart she was trying very hard to keep locked. Tomorrow, he agreed. He left. Saren stood in the back room of a trading post in a village that barely had a name, holding her daughter against her chest, and felt the bond stretch taut between them as his footsteps faded down the stairs, and out the door, and into the darkening evening. Marin appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later. Well, she asked. Saren looked at her. He found the flower. What flower? A wildflower. I pressed in a book, from the morning after the only night he was ever kind to me. Saren's voice wavered. I left it behind on purpose, and he found it, and he kept it, and it broke him. Marin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, people who do not care, do not break. People who do care do not call you useless in front of the entire pack. No, Marin agreed. They do not. But people who are frightened do all sorts of terrible things to the ones they are most frightened of loving. She paused. The question is not whether he loves you, child. The question is whether his love is safe enough to live inside. Saren looked down at Reverie, who had fallen asleep again. Her fist curled around the collar of Saren's tunic, with the same possessive grip she had used on her father. I do not know yet, Saren whispered. Then take your time finding out, Marin said. I am not going anywhere, and neither is that room upstairs. He did not leave Fenhollow. Saren had expected him to. Had expected him to stay 1 night, 2 at most, and then return to Ashenmere, because he was the Alpha King and kingdoms did not run themselves, and surely the pull of duty would outweigh the pull of a bond he had spent a year ignoring. But Valdric did not leave. He took a room at the inn and he stayed. On the first morning, Saren came downstairs to find him sitting on the bench outside the trading post in the thin early light, his elbows on his knees, waiting. Not demanding entry, not pacing with the restless authority of a man accustomed to doors opening at his approach, just sitting, waiting, like a man who understood that he was not owed a welcome and was prepared to earn one. Saren asked from the doorway, holding Reverie on one hip. No, there is porridge. She turned and went back inside, and after a moment, she heard him follow. He sat at the small table by the window and ate the porridge. Saren put in front of him without comment, though she suspected the Alpha King of Ashenmere had never eaten porridge from a wooden bowl in a room that smelled like dried lavender and baby milk. Reverie sat on the floor beside him, chewing on a wooden spoon with determined focus, and occasionally pausing to stare at him with the unblinking intensity of a judge evaluating a defendant. She is studying me, Valdric said. She studies everyone. She is studying me differently. Saren glanced at her daughter. He was right. Reverie was watching him with an attention that went beyond curiosity. Her small brow was furrowed, her gaze sharp and searching, and Saren recognized the expression because she had worn it herself 1,000 times. The careful measuring attention of someone deciding whether a person was safe. "Give her time," Saren said. "I have time," Valdric replied. And he meant it. The days that followed established a pattern that Saren had not planned and did not know how to stop. Valdric came to the trading post each morning. He sat. He ate. He helped, in ways that surprised her. He restocked shelves without being asked. He repaired a hinge on the back door that had been sticking for weeks. He carried a delivery of grain sacks from the road to the storeroom on his shoulders, and old Tilda Voss watched from the market square with an expression that suggested she would be telling the story for the rest of her natural life. He did not push. He did not mention Ashenmere, or returning, or the pack, or the bond, or any of the enormous, unresolved things that hung in the air between them. He simply showed up each morning, did whatever needed doing, and left each evening when Saren told him it was time. And he learned reverie. It happened slowly, the way trust always did. On the third day, reverie allowed him to hold her without screaming. On the fifth day, she fell asleep in his arms for the first time, and Valdric sat motionless in the chair for 2 hours rather than risk waking her. On the seventh day, she laughed at him. He had been making a face, something between a growl and a grimace that he probably did not realize he was doing, and reverie had erupted into giggles so violent she hiccuped. Valdric stared at her with the expression of a man who had just discovered a new reason to exist. "She laughed at me," he told Seren that evening, still looking stunned. "She laughs at most things. Not like that. That was different." It was different. Seren had heard it too. And it terrified her, because every laugh, every moment of connection between her daughter and this man was another thread binding them to a life she was not sure she could survive returning to. On the 10th night, Seren could not sleep. She lay in the narrow bed with reverie curled beside her, and the bond pulsed in her chest with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She could feel Valdric at the inn, awake. She knew he was awake because the bond had a texture to it, a specific quality of tension that she had learned to read during the 3 months she had spent in his palace, invisible and watchful, and attuned to him in ways he never knew. She rose quietly, pulled a shawl around her shoulders, and left reverie sleeping under Marin's watch. She did not tell Marin where she was going, because Marin's raised eyebrow would have been more than she could bear. The inn was a squat stone building at the end of the lane, and the window of Valdric's room on the upper floor was lit by a single candle. Saren stood in the dark below it and felt absurd, like a character in one of the old stories, the ones she had read as a girl in the Foundling House, where lovers stood beneath windows and declared impossible things. She did not declare anything. She threw a pebble at the glass. The curtain pulled back. Valdric's face appeared backlit by the candle, and even at this distance, she could see his surprise. "Come down," she said, keeping her voice low. He came. He appeared at the inn door wearing a loose shirt and trousers and no shoes, and Saren realized she had never seen the Alpha King without boots before. His bare feet on the cold cobblestones made him look vulnerable in a way that ached. "Walk with me," she said. They walked the lane together in the dark, past the shuttered trading post, past the smithy, past the grain store with its crooked chimney, and out to the edge of the village where the river curved through a stand of birch trees, and the moonlight turned the water silver. Saren sat on the bank. After a moment, Valdric sat beside her. "Not too close. Close enough. I need to ask you something," Saren said, "and I need you to answer honestly even if the answer is terrible. Ask if the moon had not chosen me, if there had been no rite, no bond, no ceremony. If I had simply been a woman in your pack, unremarkable, invisible, someone you passed in the corridor every day without seeing." She paused. "Would you have ever noticed me?" The silence lasted long enough that Saren felt the answer forming in it and braced herself. "No," Valdric said. The honesty was brutal and clean. "I would not have noticed you," he continued, "because I was not looking. I was not capable of looking. I was so consumed by duty and control, and the image of what an alpha king was supposed to be, that I had no room for anything else. The moon did not just choose you for me, Saren. It forced me to see something I would have been too blind and too proud to find on my own. He turned to face her. But I see you now, he said. I see the woman who walked into a forest alone and pregnant and built a life from nothing. I see the woman who earned a place in this village through sheer competence and kindness and stubbornness. I see the mother who has raised my daughter to laugh and to grip and to look at the world like she is ready to fight it. His voice roughened. And I see the woman who pressed a wildflower in a book because one night mattered to her, and I am going to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the fact that it mattered. Saren stared at the river. The moonlight fractured on the moving water, scattering into pieces and reassembling. Scattering and reassembling. Brennock, she said. Gone. I exiled him the week after you disappeared. He challenged me publicly, and I gave him two choices. Leave Ashenmere or face me in the ring. He chose to leave. Valdric paused. Dreven, my beta, said it was the first time in months I had looked like a king. And the elders who supported him? 3 have been replaced. The remaining 2 have been placed under review. The Pack Council now includes 4 Omegas, 2 of whom are women, who were treated similarly to how you were treated, and they are not quiet about it. Saren looked at him. You did this while searching for me. I did this because of you. Because every change I made, I asked myself whether you would have felt safe in the room. And if the answer was no, I tore the room apart and rebuilt it. The bond hummed between them, warm and insistent. I am still angry, Saren said. You should be. I am still hurt. You will be for a long time. And I do not know if Ashenmere will ever feel like home. Valdric was quiet for a moment. Then he said, It does not have to. Home is wherever you and Reverie are. If that is Fenhollow, then I will live in Fenhollow. If it is a cottage on the coast, or a room above a trading post or a tent in the middle of a field, I will be there. He met her eyes. The kingdom needs a king. But I need you more than any kingdom. Saren felt the tears come again. But these were different, warmer, less sharp. Marin would kill you within a week if you moved here permanently, she said. Marin already threatened to poison my porridge if I made you cry again. She did not. She did. This morning, with specifics. Saren laughed. It came out broken and raw and real. And Valdric's face changed when he heard it. Something in him softened, some last fortification crumbling. And he reached for her hand. She let him take it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and shaking slightly, and the bond flared so brightly in her chest that she gasped. She felt everything through it. 8 months of searching, of running, of aching, of grieving. 8 months of lying awake in an empty palace, reaching across cold sheets for someone who was not there. 8 months of a howl, trapped inside his chest, that had no end and no beginning and no relief. And beneath all of it, deep and steady and terrifying in its certainty, love. Not the ceremonial love of the moonrite, not the dutiful performance of a mating bond. Something rawer, something that had been forged in absence and hammered into shape by loss and quenched in the cold water of his own failings. Come home, he whispered. Please come home. Not yet, Saren said. But soon, he nodded. He did not argue. He did not push. He held her hand by the river in the moonlight and let soon be enough. But Saren leaned her head against his shoulder, and she felt him go very still. And then she felt his arm come up around her, careful and slow, and she let it. She let him hold her on the riverbank while the water moved past them in the dark. And for the first time in a year, the bond in her chest did not ache. It rested. The return to Ashenmere happened on Saren's terms. Not in a single grand gesture, not in a carriage draped in ceremony and expectation. She came back on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays had become significant to them now, riding beside Valdric on the rutted road she had once walked barefoot and broken in the opposite direction. Reverie sat in her lap, wide-eyed and curious. her small hands reaching for passing leaves, and her wide eyes tracking every bird that crossed the sky. She was 10 months old, and already showing signs of her father's stubbornness and her mother's quiet observation, a combination that Marin had described as either magnificent or catastrophic, possibly both. Marin had wept when they left, though she denied it vigorously, and claimed the redness around her eyes was caused by an allergy to sentimentality. She had pressed a bundle into Saren's arms at the door of the trading post, wrapped in the same wool she had once pretended was from the storeroom. "If he makes you cry, you come straight back," Marin said. "The room is yours." "It will always be yours," Saren corrected, and Marin's jaw had gone tight, and her eyes had gone bright, and she had turned away to reorganize a shelf that did not need reorganizing. Ashenmere looked different through the gate. Or perhaps Saren was different. The walls were the same dark stone, the courtyard the same packed earth, the great hall rising above the compound, with its blackened oak beams, and its torch brackets, and its long tables where the entire pack had once watched her be dismantled. But the faces were not the same. Drevin met them in the courtyard. The beta looked at Saren, then at Reverie, and his expression softened into something that might have been relief. He bowed, not to Valdric, but to Saren. "Welcome home, my queen," he said. The pack gathered that evening, not in the great hall. Valdric had ordered the summit moved to the open courtyard, under the sky, where the torchlight reached everyone equally, and no one sat at the far end of any table. He stood before his pack, with Saren beside him and Reverie in his arms, and he spoke. "I owe this pack an apology," he said, and his voice carried across the courtyard with the weight of a man who had practiced these words in the dark for months. "I owe one person in particular an apology that I will spend the rest of my life delivering. I called my mate useless. I said it in this hall in front of all of you, and not one of us, myself included, had the courage to challenge it." The courtyard was silent. "Saren is the reason I am standing here. She is the reason Ashenmere still has a king. She is the reason I learned what it means to earn something instead of demanding it. And she is the mother of my daughter, who she carried alone and raised alone, because I gave her no reason to believe I was worth staying for." He looked at Saren. "I was wrong," he said, and the words were for the pack, but his eyes were only for her. "And I will be wrong again, because I am not a good man, but I am trying to be a better one." And that started the day she left, and it will not stop as long as I am breathing. Saren felt the tears on her face and did not wipe them away. Beside her, Reverie grabbed a fistful of her father's collar and pulled herself against his chest, and the Alpha King of Ashenmere held his daughter in front of his entire pack and did not hide the fact that his eyes were wet. Months passed. Healing happened the way it always does. In fits and starts and setbacks and small victories that accumulated so gradually, they were easy to miss. Saren rebuilt her place in Ashenmere. Not the place that had been assigned to her by ceremony, the last chair at the end of the table, but a place she carved for herself. She took over the palace herbery, which had been neglected for years, and turned it into something Marin would have grudgingly approved of. She sat on the new pack council and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had survived the worst thing a community could do to a person and come back anyway. And every night, she slept beside Valdric. Not because the moonlight demanded it, not because duty required it, not because the bond pulled her there, but because she chose it. On a warm evening near the end of summer, Saren sat in the courtyard with Reverie on her hip, watching the last light turn the stone walls gold. Valdric appeared beside her, still smelling faintly of the forest from his evening patrol, and sat down on the bench without a word. Reverie reached for him immediately. He took her, settled her against his chest, and she curled into him with the easy, absolute trust of a child who had never once in her life been given a reason to doubt that she was wanted. "Marin sent a letter," Saren said. "What does it say?" "She says the roof still leaks. The trading post is not the same without me, and she hopes you are aware that she will poison you if you make me cry. She has already poisoned me. The porridge she served me on the last morning tasted distinctly of revenge." Saren laughed, and the sound carried across the courtyard, and a guard at the gate who had been at the winter summit all those months ago looked up at the sound and smiled, because laughter from the queen's bench was something new in Ashenmere, and all of them were still getting used to it. Reverie fell asleep against her father's chest, her breathing slowed, her fist relaxed, and Valdric looked down at her with the same stunned, helpless, conquered expression he had worn the first time she had laughed at him in a back room in Fenhollow. Saren leaned her head against his shoulder. The same gesture, the same surrender, the same quiet act of trust that had started everything on a riverbank in the moonlight. "Thank you," Valdric murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For coming back." "Thank you for being worth coming back to," Saren replied. They sat together in the fading light, their daughter asleep between them, and the courtyard was quiet, and the bond in Saren's chest was not pulling or aching or straining. It was still, it was warm, it was home.